Forearm development is something that's highly predetermined by genetics. Don't get me wrong, you can develop some great forearms no matter how good or bad your genetics are. But when we talk specifically about forearm development, it's important to understand your own genetic makeup and how your training should reflect that. Let me explain exactly what I mean in simple terms. For this example, let's use the biceps. Like any other muscle group, you have the muscle belly, or in this case, the bicep, and you have the tendon. The tendon making up the gap between the muscle belly and the joint. Believe it or not, that gap or the length of the tendon in relation to the muscle, that's predetermined by genetics. Having a big gap, a long tendon, or a short muscle belly, that generally means you have a bit more limited potential for growth. And your muscle groups that personally have very long muscle bellies are likely to be your best body parts when trained correctly. I'm using the example of biceps here because, as you can see, my biceps personally insert very close to the elbow. There's a minimal gap between that bicep and the elbow joint, and it just so happens that my biceps tend to be one of my better body parts. Now, this doesn't mean that guys with shorter bicep inserts can't build massive arms, but they are likely to lack some level of muscle fullness because no matter how large the muscle actually gets, it's not taking up as much space. Now, the forearms specifically, they tend to be highly genetic compared to some other muscle groups. I personally was blessed with long bicep inserts, but unfortunately, average or even short forearm inserts. You can see this especially when I hit a side chest pose or even a most muscular. The top of the forearm, or the brachioradialis, runs from the elbow to only about mid-forearm for me. And guys with truly great forearm development, you usually see them insert all the way down close to the wrist. But now that we talked about genetics, let's talk a bit more about training. When we're training to build bigger forearms, specifically for aesthetics, it's generally the brachioradialis, or again, the top of the forearm muscle, that's going to have the greatest visual impact on our appearance. So we want to make it a priority to target that specifically. Now, many guys who want massive forearms will generally do endless amounts of wrist curls, reverse curls, and other forearm isolation work. These exercises are fine, but from my experience, they're not the best mass builders for the forearms. And before I get to the actual exercises that I do like, let me first point out, almost all of the best pro bodybuilders in the world, whether current or previous, most of them have done very little direct forearm work. That's because a lot of the methods I'm going to talk about also work very well for forearm development, even if it's not considered direct work. You can argue that it's either the right way to go about it or not, but if all the best bodybuilders in the world needed to do tons of direct forearm work, don't you think that they would do it? Now, the forearms, being a muscle group that's worked literally in every single upper body movement, and even some lower body training when doing things like deadlifts where you're holding the bar in your hands, they're a muscle group that's worked constantly. They're hit with a ton of volume and frequency, likely more than any other body part. And with a body part that's already exposed to a high level of volume, frequency, and stimulus, the answer is generally not to just add more volume. But a better way to go about it is pick exercises that expose that muscle to heavier direct stimulus. For example, a barbell curl, that's obviously a bicep movement, but you can bet there's also a ton of forearm involvement as well. And if your main goal is to get more forearm development, you can do something like incorporate reverse curls. These are going to generally target the brachioradialis much more. And guys who are generally very strong in reverse curls, most of them have very massive forearms. I personally like this exercise for higher rep sets, and I'll go as high as 15 to 20 plus reps on each set. Another way I like to perform them is at the end of a superset after doing traditional barbell curls. Now, doing hammer curls is also another extremely effective exercise. And in my opinion, this is one of the best mass builders for the forearms. Doing them in a more normal, neutral grip position will generally hit the brachialis of the bicep a bit more. But if you want to take this a step further, performing them across the body, that generally hits the forearms even more. These two exercises are by far my two favorite forearm builders. But one thing I don't want to leave out is the benefits of heavy dumbbell curls. While no one thinks of these as a forearm exercise, it's actually one of the best movements you could do to develop them. Pick a heavy load that you can do for 6 to 10 repetitions. Perform them in alternating fashion. Throughout that entire set, the forearms have to statically contract a heavy load. You're basically alternating each rep with one arm pronating and supinating, and the other arm holding a heavy load for an extended period of time. When you're doing heavy dumbbell curls using 50, 60, or 70 pounds, and then you go on to hammer curls and reverse curls, your biceps are going to be pumped, and your forearms are going to be just as fatigued. And in my opinion, progressing on those will have a night and day difference than just focusing on wrist curls. So as you can see, there's really nothing fancy about forearm training. But if you want to focus on them in your training, I highly recommend you start incorporating high rep reverse curls and hammer curls. And to top it off, if you start adding in heavy alternating dumbbell curls, that's likely to leave you with some massive forearms. And if you want to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, check out my 5-day mass gain program down below. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.